Radio Al Ansar podcasts.
نحمد ونصلي على رسول الكريم أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to another Business Matters program. Yes, if it's Tuesday night, it's me Anwar Mullah on Business Matters. Tonight I'm going to have a guest on the line from Johannesburg, but before I introduce him, Business Matters brought to you by the Minara Chamber of Business, or Minara Chamber of Commerce, and we loud and clear on 90.4 FM Durban, 105.6 in Pietermaritzburg. And the number in the studio, in case you want to call in and have a word or two or ask a question to our esteemed guests, it's 0861904904, and the WhatsApp number 06090411056. With that out of the way, let me introduce you to our guest, and he's a gentleman by the name of Matete Tulare. Matete is no stranger to the airwaves. He's a regular on Kaya FM, Power FM, SA FM, NCA, and also Newsroom Africa. And we certainly are very privileged and honored to have him on tonight on Radio Al Ansar. So with that, it's welcome to Matete Tulare.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam, Matete. How are you doing?
Yes. A bit like the Rand all over the show.
I like that. Matete, yeah, so that gives you a brief idea of what we're talking about. Indeed, we're going to be discussing the Rand tonight. That's what Matete apparently lives by and dies by day in and day out. And we're going to be talking about what influences currency, what influences currencies, and specifically what influences the South African Rand. And we certainly have an expert in Matete to guide us through the program. Just to give you a brief idea of what Matete is up to, he heads up the corporate and financial institution, forex execution across flow sales, structuring and customer dealing at Rand Merchant Bank. A role which entails leading a team of foreign exchange and money market dealers that cover the following clients in manufacturing, mining, oil and gas, global traders, agriculture, asset managers, and state-owned enterprise. Matete's experience spans over 10 years in the global market space, having started as a foreign exchange sales trader at HSBC in Johannesburg in 2010, before joining Rand Merchant Bank as a foreign exchange and money market dealer in 2013. Before rejoining HSBC as a fixed income trader in 2015. Matete holds a BCom Honours, Financial Economics from the University of Johannesburg. When he's not working, he's off looking for adventure and delicious food. Sounds a bit like me. With passion for travel and giving insight into what is happening in financial markets. And as I mentioned, he's been on many news channels and continues to be. So, wow, Matete, that's quite an impressive CB. Tell us a little bit about your early life, your days, your schooling career, and what drove you to become a foreign exchange dealer?
So I suppose it comes from, every day having to sit in front of the news with my grandfather. He was a very avid reader, and I think just making sure that, you get the latest in terms of what's happening in society. And also just watching what happens, every time you see the news, they have that little snippet about the Rand. And, that caught my interest at a very early age. And, for me at that point in time, I decided that I would actually, follow this route of being in the financial markets. And, subsequent to that, I, did economics at the former RA in Johannesburg. And I went to do my honors in financial economics. And I think I've really been in a sense whereby one really wants to delve into financial markets and obviously unpack it and see what really happens. And I think this is, something that for the past close to 13 years has been part of my journey, where I've traded fixed income for South African bonds, and also FX across the G10 currencies. So this would be the likes of euro, dollar, against also the likes of the cable, the Swiss franc. For a global bank such as HSBC, I mean, we know that they're a triple A rated bank. But also, I think after some time, I just decided to go into the local market and obviously, join Royal Merchant Bank. I think it's one of the best local investment banks, and obviously, it comes with a lot of accolades. But at the same time, over the past couple of years, we've also grown the business, and obviously, we really service quite a number of clients. Some of the clients that also down there in Durban include the likes of Fourscore, which is in Richards Bay. We also speak to the likes of Tronox, which is also out in Richards Bay, Mr. Price, Bell Equipment. So that we really cover a large spectrum of clients. So obviously it's just not only South Africa based, but also offshore counterparts such as the likes of Nestle, Richmond, quite a number of global clients as well that we obviously service. And I think for me, that's been the journey that, we really try and make sure that we help clients in terms of unpacking these financial markets, because they have been tricky for the past couple of years.
Yes, I suppose, Matete, if one could reliably predict the exchange rate, or had that crystal ball in front of you, you'd be a very, very rich man. I certainly try, predicting the rand and where it's going to be going up, down, sideways, because we all kind of exposed to it in our daily lives in terms of trying to pay our foreign exchange bills for the goods that we import into the country, etc. And I must be honest, and I say I get it wrong more than I get it right. But that's the nature of currency. I mean, surely, none of us knows which way it's going, and there's so much of volatility, so much of unknown that comes through, and that influences. So we tonight are going to talk about the repercussion of South Africa being grey listed. Now, this is a term that's come about recently called grey listed, and also what influences a country's currency. So, tell us a little bit about this term called grey listing, and where has that come from?
So I think what you need to take into account over the past couple of years is the fact that, there's been a threat that's been coming from the global anti-money laundering body, which is called the Financial Action Task Force, which obviously has flagged some deficiencies in a lot of countries' financial controls. And obviously the global anti-money laundering body has placed countries that have got on notice, that have made some sort of been found wanting in terms of their effectiveness to measure and combat money laundering. I think that has been a really big thing, and obviously the financing of terrorism. We need to look at countries such as South Sudan, Pakistan, Syria. The danger to the economy lies in a further loss of credibility as an investment destination. So this is a part and parcel of what has come about. And obviously what happens is that, there's 11 measures that the FATF measures. And South Africa, unfortunately, has been found wanting. So we're at a point where right now, where if we don't get our ducks in a row, we won't be able to escape being tarnished by, being placed on the grey list. I think not only will we be fighting worsening economic conditions, but obviously efforts to diversify the risk by investing offshore will even become more onerous for a lot of our South African clients.
So, Matete, who decides on this so-called grey list, and what makes them the world's watchdogs? Does somebody get up one fine morning and decide, South Africa is not good enough to, and we're going to put them onto a so-called grey list, and who makes these decisions?
So just remember that the FATF is a anti-money laundering body that is obviously encompassing quite a number of countries around the world. So obviously they are really making sure that, a lot of the dubious states, unless local authorities have some sort of revised frameworks to curb money laundering and the financing of terrorism, that is something that they have been warning us since 2021, and we've been given up until October 2022 to at least demonstrate how we intend to remedy some of these matters. Now, what we also need to take into account is the fact that it will take about 3 years to effect all these necessary changes. And also, the country must demonstrate that we've got a credible action plan, that we've taken meaningful steps to already do this by next year to avert being added to the grey list. Now, should these measures not be addressed according to the FATF's concerns, will be grey listed by next year, February 2023. Now, we also need to take into account that also the National Treasury is watching this because they've expressed a willingness to make the needed changes. And even the acting DG there said there's a good chance that we could miss the October deadline. And this obviously stems from the fact that Parliament, which has a standing committee on finance, has insisted that there be some sort of public participation process around the proposed changes. And also, we just need to make sure that we remember that lawmakers have gone into recess up until mid-August this month. So obviously, the National Treasury is also fearful that we could miss the deadline. And obviously, should that happen, we could find ourselves as an outsider in the global financial framework. And obviously, there could be increased scrutiny and also more onerous financing terms that would not be favorable to a lot of our South African investors. And obviously, global investors will also be less likely to put their money into economy with dubious financial controls.
Okay, you mentioned 2 dates, one being the end of October and then the other one being February next year. So what is expected of us by the end of October, and then what is expected of us by the end of February?
So this is the expectation. So we need to make sure that we go back to the FATF by the end of October to show them that we've really got a credible action plan. And if we don't do that, then obviously they're going to announce that by February 2023, we'll be on the grey list. And if you remember something, this is the same fate that Mauritius suffered when it was placed on the grey list in February 2020, from which it exited nearly 2 years later. In the case of Mauritius, the government intervened, and obviously all the financial institutions, the casinos, the jewelers, and estate agents had to adopt stricter controls in terms of their financial controls. So that could also be, have a really detrimental effect for South Africans, and it could also come with a reputational damage, which could also lead to capital and currency outflows, but also overlaying that with transactional, administrative, and funding costs for banks could also increase.
Matete, you work for RMB, which is part of the First Rand Group. I mean, it's a world-class banking institution, and we have many other very fine banking institutions in South Africa. Our foreign currency dealings are in my opinion, well regulated. Whenever we're traveling, or making foreign payments done through strict regulatory bodies, etc. Wouldn't all of this work in our favor? Why are we kind of being targeted? I mean, you mentioned countries like Pakistan and I think was it Syria or that you mentioned. Now, there's a huge difference between our structures here and our the advancement, I would say, of the banking system as opposed to some of the other countries. So why are we being all painted with the same brush?
So I suppose the pun there being obviously, the paint. But if you think about it, the increased scrutiny at this point in time follows that being grey listed means that every counterpart across the world will have to apply high levels of due diligence to South African businesses and individuals with offshore interests. The grey listing is also an economy-wide risk, because also from a banking perspective, the cost of capital will also increase, and also businesses will find it more difficult to transact internationally because of their enhanced due diligence. Now, when it also comes to international banks, they'll also be required to have an extra layer of bureaucracy when dealing with South African clients, whilst from an international funding perspective, the likes of the World Bank and the EU will also apply additional restrictions to support for the country, also for consumers and investors. We may be denied to access certain products and markets that refuse to deal with countries that are placed on the grey list. So as you can imagine, the restrictions don't mean exclusion from international markets and banking systems, but it does add a layer of complexity, bureaucracy, and inconvenience. So obviously that just means the red tape. I think for a lot of the individuals locally, you'll still be able to invest offshore and open bank accounts, but this will come with an enhanced due diligence that is more vigorous than the usual know your client checks. Now, from a macroeconomic level, our status with the FATF might also place us on a weaker footing when it comes to the country's credit ratings, which obviously will add costs to common transactions because of the added admin and the due diligence requirements. For business, this also means extra checks that could also demand hiring or contracting needed skills to ensure compliance, which obviously hits the balance sheet, which means obviously you need to pay more people, and obviously this is an added layer on your business, and obviously means lower revenues at the end of the day.
Okay, let's not beat around the bush too much. Are we being punished simply because we're not towing the line of the West and we part of BRICS and that's not something that goes down very well with the Western nations at the moment, especially considering what's happening in the Russia-Ukraine war and the taking of sides in that particular conflict. So, yeah, maybe talk us through that.
I highly doubt it. I think, the unfortunate reality is the process to remedy some of these policies and procedures lies with National Treasury and the government. So there's little as individuals that we can do. However, it might be an opportune moment to initiate international investments and financial matters prior to the February 2023 deadline, to circumvent delays and obviously administrative headaches. This won't avoid any future scrutiny of facilities that you open pre-grey listing, but it could remove some of the initial hassle factors. This could also come in the form of being subjected to due diligence checks by financial institutions as often as twice a year. I mean, at this point in time, most of the time it's done once a year, but this also depends on your risk profile. And if you have international business interests or structures like trusts, you'd also have to expect to undergo more regular checks on compliance with international practices. Unfortunately, what we've seen since the global financial crisis is the fact that a lot of regulation has come into place. There's a lot of compliance that is coming into place. There's a lot of checks and balances to ensure that a lot of countries are, maintaining their financial controls, and obviously just making sure that we adopt stricter controls across the board from a financial institution perspective. Because as you've seen, there's been a lot of naughtiness in financial markets. People have lost money. So I think if anything, this is just one of those issues that we're just trying to make sure that I think from a global perspective, there's more regulation, there's more compliance, and obviously transparency for a lot of the South African businesses and also international investors that are looking at South Africa.
Okay, you mentioned the example of Mauritius and that they were grey listed in 2020. Can you relate to us what happened in Mauritius immediately they were grey listed? What were the immediate implications and the longer term implications?
So if anything, the initial thing that starts happening is obviously first and foremost sentiment towards the country will dampen. It does also bring about reputational damage. As I said, also in this case, we also know that obviously Mauritius derives a lot of its revenue from travel and tourism. So hence the government intervened, and obviously there's all the financial institutions there, the casinos, the estate agents had to adopt stricter controls, and obviously that means that the checks and balances there had to be tightened up. And obviously we've seen over the past couple of years, that Mauritius has started to be quite really not relaxed in terms of how they look at due diligence, but they've actually been really scrutinizing all clients that obviously invest in their country, and obviously they've adopted a slightly different mentality in making sure that there's stricter controls in terms of global investors that come into the country and look at different tax initiatives and obviously structures for the likes of Mauritius.
Okay. I've heard you mention a few times now the word casino, estate agents, and I think also jewelers. There obviously is some sort of a link between money laundering and casinos, stroke estate agents, stroke jewelers. Would I be right in saying something like that?
Very much so. I mean, if you think about, these are businesses that obviously are cash flush. These are businesses that obviously a lot of money moves through different individuals, and obviously this is why you have a situation where you have enhanced due diligence, where a lot of the financial controls would obviously mean that where does the money come from, who is the end recipient, and obviously how all these incomes are derived. There's also a lot of checks and balances to ensure that, if a person is reporting that they've sold a certain item X, that they're making sure that it is coming from a reliable source, and obviously it is not illegitimate or illegal gains. And obviously we know the fact that the likes of casinos, a lot of people, go there with cash. So obviously, that in this day and age of electronic financial transactions, we do know that, if you are carrying a few millions, like we've seen at the Pala farm gate issues, it does also raise the likes of the regulation and also compliance to actually ask these questions about why is there so much cash lying around in the system without it being invested in the banks, and why people aren't actually walking around with so much money.
Okay, let's just take the example of the casinos, for example. Firstly, how would a casino be used for money laundering? I mean, I don't know your experience in it. I certainly don't have much experience, but can you talk us through how a casino would be used for money laundering, and what is expected of that casino in the future?
So, I mean, if you think about it, at this point in time, there were issues with regards to the likes of Gibraltar, which was also placed on the grey list some time ago. If anything, if a person at that point in time obviously wins money from a casino and they ask for it to be paid in cash, that money, you do not know where the end recipient is. And I think if you think about how much the authorities at this point in time are actually trying to make sure that financial terrorism is being curbed, it does find yourself in a situation whereby obviously as a country, if you're having a high volume of casinos paying out in cash, this will obviously mean that there will be further scrutiny. And obviously it also means that the country needs to also account as to why they're doing those type of things. And obviously at that point in time, it does mean that, you will have to tighten up your systems and your policies, because obviously if you don't have a credible action plan in terms of that, that's when you get put on the grey list.
And estate agents, because I know there's rules in place with the FSCA as well, where if a person is spending more than a certain amount in cash, whether you're buying a car or a property, then there's an obligation on the financial institution to report those type of what they would call dubious transactions. So where would the estate agents fall into this?
I think at this point in time, if anything, when it comes to estate agents, it would be one of those issues where obviously the first point in case would be where does the source of the income and the funds come from, and obviously who the end recipient is. I think if anything, we have seen that, when you fill in all these forms, they always ask the source of funds. And obviously, as you alluded to earlier, there is a certain threshold, which I'm not too sure what is the threshold at this point in time, but it does obviously mean that if you do pay in cash, you need to actually, allude to where the source of the income comes from. But if you think about also the 23 countries that are placed at the FATF grey list at this point in time, as of June, the likes of Albania, Barbados, Gibraltar, the highlighted earlier, Jamaica, Morocco, Pakistan, Senegal. These are countries that have obviously all been in the news for the wrong reasons, and obviously, money laundering is a global factor. And obviously, if you don't tighten up your controls, then obviously even certain sectors of the economy do not touch on that, and obviously scrutinize their clients and obviously enhance the due diligence on their clients, then obviously it is going to make you fall into this grey list.
Okay. Matete, speaking about the rand, and I'm going to go for a bit of an ad break. We got some bills to pay here. And as soon as we come back, we're gonna touch on the rand and for what's left of the program and talk about the volatility and what drives the rand, and you can talk about what the global factors that do drive the rand, and finish off again with a little bit on the grey listing side. So if you would beg my indulgence, I need to take us for an ad break.
Teaching you something new every day. Radio Al Ansar.
Business Matters.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. If you've just joined us, it's Business Matters on Radio Al Ansar, 90.4 FM Durban and 105.6 FM Pietermaritzburg. We've been having a very interesting discussion with Matete Tulare on the foreign, on the rand, what the factors that drive the rand, and the imminent, or we hope not, grey listing of South Africa. That is something that's going to be possible at the end of October and then at the end of February again next year. So we hope that doesn't happen. But yeah. So Tulare, I got a question that's come through here on WhatsApp. It's quite a long question, but I'm going to read it out to you. And it starts off by saying, I disagree with your guest. USA must be the biggest country guilty of money laundering and terrorism financing, especially in the supply of weapons to terrorists. How come their repo rate is 150% lower than us, and our currency is 1,600% weaker? 1 rand is equal to 16. Well, $1 is equal to 16 rand. It goes on to talk about the U.S. repo rate, 2.3% times 150% equals 5.75%. These are massive differences. How come their currency always wins? Further, setting of gold price when they are not the biggest producers, etc. The system is per what is taught into financial institutions via universities. The system is designed to be advantageous to few who control the world banking system. Money laundering via casinos is claimed to be won at casinos. The system is designed as a camouflage as winnings. He is not mentioning USA and Europe casinos. That is why gambling is forbidden in Islam. Nabi Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was told this when casinos did not even exist. Very true. You want to comment on that a little bit? Basically, what he's alluding to is that the USA is gets away with a lot which we don't. Tulare, are you there? Matete, are you there?
I can hear you.
Well, yeah, it's quite a.
I was actually waiting for you to.
Quite a strong response there from a guest, but I would like to hear your comments on that.
So look, that is a very interesting comment. I think if anything, obviously, as I alluded to earlier, all countries at this point in time, including the likes of the US, are not, squeaky clean. Every country at this point in time is obviously, subjected to the FATF. If anything, at this point in time, I mean, obviously, it's an intergovernmental body that obviously sets the standards for combating illicit financial activity. And obviously, this is obviously addressed the specific shortcomings, that we see globally to prevent financial crimes. Just working in the banking sector, we also are subjected to a lot of financial training and obviously exams around compliance and regulation. So obviously this is something that obviously a lot of banking counterparts and countries face. I mean, if you think about it, 2008, the global financial crisis started out in the US because of the subprime crisis that we saw there, where some of our counterparts out in the US were also selling financial products that weren't obviously quite niche, and obviously at that point in time they obviously affected the financial markets. We saw the crash. And I think that's why over the past couple of years, you've seen the step up in terms of financial regulation and obviously compliance. And that also filters through into, combating the illicit financial activity that we're seeing also from a day-to-day perspective, and obviously what's happening for corporates and individuals.
Yeah, but I alluded to it earlier in the program, and I think the person that asked this question has kind of hit the nail on the head in terms of what makes the USA a watchdog as opposed to everybody else. What gives them the right to be this kind of authoritative figure that can dictate to other countries what is so-called right and what is so-called right, when they basically have more debt than all of us put together?
Truth be told, I don't have the answer to that. I mean, obviously, some of these bodies have been in place way before us. And I think at this point in time, as I said, it's an intergovernmental body. They are obviously headquartered in Paris. And obviously, I think at this point in time, you could argue the same thing about the ratings agencies. They're also headquartered out in the US and some in London, etc. So, some of these companies have been, around way before us. So, I think that is obviously a very interesting observation from your listener.
Okay, excellent. Let's move on a bit. We have a few minutes left on the program. And I'm going to ask you a very wide question here. Is what in general drives the rand's volatility?
So I think you really need to be, looking at it from a different lens. There's quite a lot that is obviously affecting the rand at this point in time. If you need to just look at it, I think at this point in time, we are really being driven by commodity prices, the volatility there that we've seen, the global market volatility, and also the domestic political uncertainty. I think in addition to all of these, it's the economic surprises that originate out from the U.S., but, it's not only just from the U.S., but it's also economic data that comes out of South Africa, Europe, and China. I mean, obviously, these are some of the biggest markets that we talk about and we focus on. If you think about the U.S. and China, it's number one and number two in the world. And obviously, when the U.S. or China sneezes, the rest of the world catches a cold. But some of the drivers also include some of the local and international macroeconomic surprises. But if you think about some of the things that we've seen, I mean, in broad strokes, we find that macroeconomic surprises play a very limited role in explaining the rand volatility. In contrast, global factors, including the likes of commodity prices, the financial market risk perceptions, they drive the bulk of rand volatility. If anything, local political uncertainty also plays a significant role in explaining the rand volatility. So if you have to strip it out, I would really say 2/3 is global factors and 1/3 is local factors. If you think about the rand, obviously, it really follows a fluid exchange rate regime that's obviously governed by supply and demand, but also major international market activities affect the exchange rate movement of the rand.
Okay. Global uncertainty, China, commodity prices, they all affect the rand. Can I put you on a bit of a spot and say, where would you call the rand, Matete, for the end of this year?
That's trying to look at the crystal ball, and I think if you have to think about the rand.
Well, I'm calling on your experience, Matete. I mean, years and years of experience. Yeah.
And this is the dilemma about the rand and financial markets at this point in time. I mean, I'm going to just take 3 or 4 anecdotes about the rand, just for your listeners, just to keep aware, and obviously also then just overlaid with the 2 black swan events that we've had in 2020 being the COVID-19 pandemic, and obviously this year being the second black swan event with the geopolitical tension out in Russia and Ukraine. But if you just cast your mind back to 2008, we had the housing crisis that I spoke about earlier. At that point in time, when that went through the market, the rand was at 8.05 rand. On the back of that, the rand went to 11.87. In 2011, we had the pigs crisis out in the Eurozone, where the likes of Portugal, Italy, Greece and Spain were going through their issues. At that point in time, the rand went from 6.60 rand to 7.60 rand. And also, if you think about 2013, we had what we called the Tampa Tantrum with Ben Bernanke out in the US. They ran from R8.90 to R10.30. And then you just had to cast your mind back just to about 7 years ago. In 2015, we had Nenegate, where the rand obviously weakened quite significantly. In 2018, we also had the US and Turkey economic fallout, and obviously subsequent to that, you also had the trade war, between the US and China, and obviously we've seen the rand weaken from 13 to 15.60. Fast track to today, we are at 16.40. And obviously the all-time highs that we have touched for the rand is 1935 at the height of COVID in 2020, in the third quarter of 2020. Look, there's a lot of risks that are in the market at this point in time. If anything, some of the factors I think that will drive us over the next, call it 4 months into the close of the year, I think US interest rates, obviously that's going to be one of the major factors that will obviously affect the rand valuation, in terms of the fact that the improvement in the US economy, expectations of rate hikes and the coming quarters by the Federal Reserve, that will have a negative impact on emerging markets. Obviously, as a lot of investors tend to look at developed Western economies, and that will obviously result in an outflow of money. Obviously, the second big issue is obviously the Chinese growth and how the numbers look there. We've seen obviously the resurgence of some COVID-19 cases, and obviously that's also had a bit of an impact on some emerging market currencies. The likes of commodity prices, we have seen gold, capitulate over the past couple of weeks. It was at, call it, close to 2,000, and it's now at 1775 odd. And also, we've got the South African Reserve Bank locally, the MPC. They also need to give us what their output is in terms of the interest rate outlook over the next 3 to 4 months into the close of the year. And then obviously, the two other big elephants in the room being Eskom, that obviously affects, production in the country. And obviously we know that, if there's no lights, factories can't operate. And then also, December, that's going to be the big one. We've got the ANC's elective conference, but also on the back of that, we've seen 2-3 weeks ago, we had also the policy conference, but also from an international investment perspective, the local policy and political uncertainty also emerges as a significant source of volatility. If anything, more policy and political predictability obviously helps smooth the rand volatility. But as I say, that's going to be an interesting dilemma, because if you think about 2016 when Ramaphosa came into effect, we had what we called Ramaphoria, where the rand strengthened quite significantly. And this year it's also going to be something that we watch out for, combined with what's happening from a global perspective, and then also just not forgetting what's happening out in Russia and Ukraine, and how that also plays itself out. So I think, if anything, it's actually anyone's guess as to whether rand could end on the 31st of December this year.
Yeah. All said it like a very, very good politician. You've said everything, but you haven't put your head on the block in terms of calling a number. So, come on, Matete, call me a number for the end of the year.
Look, I think if anything, it's going to be very interesting to see how all these dilemmas and obviously these, key events and risks play themselves out. One person could obviously say 13 against the dollar, another person could say 18 against the dollar. I mean, if I had to pull out just some of the forecasts that some of the local banks and international banks that obviously monitor the rand, you've got people who are calling for the rand to be at 12, and you've got some that are calling for it to be at 18. If you actually just think about how things are going, I think if you had to really put some money on it, I think there has been talks about a potential recession. Over the past couple of months, we've seen the likes of the copper prices capitulate by close to about 30%. If you just look at history, every time copper prices come off, it's always been followed by a recession for the past 30 years. So if anything, there's been talks about a recession in the first quarter of next year. So if anything, I think if those things play themselves out, you could have a weaker rand than where we are at this point in time.
Okay. Thanks for that, Matete. We've kind of reached almost the end of our program. Thank you very much for being with us and sharing your esteemed knowledge with us tonight, and it really has been beneficial. One last question before we leave is that, in your opinion, again, with this imminent grey listing that we could be subjected to, what type of a percentage impact would that have on the rand? I mean, obviously it will weaken the rand, but by what percentage would you say grey listing will weaken the rand?
I think that, if anything, the first point in time is obviously the reputational risk that the country faces. And also at that point in time, it's about how much will the world pull out in terms of, this grey listing. We've seen the likes of Pakistan, obviously, at that point in time when they started being on the grey list, that, affected them by about $38 billion. So, if anything, I think for South Africa's economy, it could also be a bit of a hit to the rand and obviously see us weaken slightly because of the negative perception and the reputational risk that comes with it. And I think at that point in time, we could also see, some sort of FDI go out of the country. I mean, if you think about Pakistan, the economy had to forego $38 billion in GDP between 2008 and 2019. And also that, included about $4.5 billion worth of lost trade and about close to $4 billion worth of foregone FDI. So that obviously is something that could obviously affect the rand substantially.
Okay. Matete Tulari, thanks once again for being with us. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, and we hope to get you back onto the airwaves sometime in the near future to again pick your brain on something economic. But it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the airwaves tonight.
No, thank you very much.
Okay. With that, it's time for me to leave you and get on with the 9 o'clock news. So from me, Anwar Mullah, it's wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.